Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Weekly Wisdom. My name is Bridget Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Jeff Selingo, on the opposite side of the country from Bridget, who's in Oregon, here in DC, where I'm a visiting scholar at Georgia Tech's Center for 21st Century Universities, which is an important point to make today because of our special guest today, Bridget.
Yes, and for those who don't know, aren't familiar, Weekly Wisdom comes every Monday, and it's, we think leadership matters a lot, and particularly right now. And we take a moment every Monday to have an inspiring conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to talk to them about their leadership philosophy and hopefully give you a bit of inspiration and a bit of hope for the week ahead, particularly timely considering everything going on. So this is Start the Week with Wisdom.
Thanks, Bridget. And today our guest is Ángel Cabrera, who is the president of the Georgia Institute of Technology in the great city of Atlanta, where, as I said, I'm a visiting scholar. And previous to that, he started there at Georgia Tech last year. And previous to that was the president of George Mason University right here in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Ángel, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure.
Welcome.
So, Anu, we've been really focused since we started this series with presidents now, about 2 months ago, Bridget, on obviously the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on colleges and universities. But I'd be remiss not to start where the news has been over the last couple of days since the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis a week ago today, and obviously the protests all over the world in many cases now because of this, and obviously in Atlanta. And I want to bring this down to the university level because obviously we don't have students on campus now, and I would imagine that if we did, there would likely be some protests on our college and university campuses as well. But selective colleges and universities have come under a lot of fire in the last couple of decades, but particularly over the last couple of years, because we always have thought about higher education, particularly in the US, as an engine of social mobility. And we know from the research that Raj Chetty and others have done that, at most of our selective colleges and universities, that largely they are havens for the wealthiest Americans in this country, and that they're not necessarily that engine of mobility that we've always talked about. I know that at Georgia Tech, as you've been thinking about your vision for what you want the Institute to become, you've talked a lot about equity. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Georgia Tech and higher education in general becoming much more, and selective particularly, in your case, more of an engine of economic mobility in this country?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I actually I agree with the premise. We as universities have an absolute crucial mission to provide opportunity to be really the one of the biggest instruments we have of social mobility and opportunity, and we have both a lot to be proud of and a lot to point in terms of the how we have delivered on that mission, but there's a lot to be critical about, and we have to admit that and to recognize that. And in this sort of very painful week and very painful weekend that we're experiencing in cities across America, and Atlanta, of course, not excluded. I think we have to be very thoughtful. We have to all be thinking again, and of course we all have the right to protest and to demand change from people with power, but we also think have an opportunity really to think about what is it that each of us and each of our institutions, in our case Georgia Tech, can do to really deliver on that promise of equal opportunity, of inclusion, or of a much more just world. At Georgia Tech, for example, I mean, we're dealing. This is the tension we're dealing with. On one hand, as the institute has established itself as one of the leading public universities in America, something we're very, very proud of, and as we really attract more and more and more applicants and students from around the world and across the United States. When you actually look at our numbers, we don't do as well as we should do in terms of, for example, the number of African Americans. We're in the middle of a city with a majority Black population, and our undergraduate African American numbers barely reach 7%. So there's a lot that we need to be better at, and I think we're right to hold our universities accountable for that. And we're part of complex systems, and but I think that it doesn't help for us to say, well, it's someone else's fault. I mean, whether it's the K-12 system or other aspects of our society. I mean, we really have a responsibility to be thinking about what is it that we can do and we must do to deliver on that mission of equal opportunity.
Great. That's super helpful. And I am curious because not only is this a really difficult time in this country's history, it being overlaid over the pandemic, it's just there's a lot going on right now, and I'm curious because it seems like leadership matters, like I said, more than ever. And this is not your first time at the presidency. You have experience with this, so I'm wondering, kind of, as a leader, how do you look at a challenging situation, whether it be COVID, whether it be what's going on with race and equity in this country, just in general, as a president? Do you have a leadership framework or a way that you kind of think about the responsibility of leadership or how you lead, especially in a difficult time, particularly if there's anything from your past experience as a president at George Mason that might be helpful?
Yeah, I have been. I've run before I arrived to Georgia Tech. I had been running academic institutions for 15 years as a chief executive, and honestly, I mean, that experience informs how I approach situations like these. I have colleagues who just started their first uh, top leadership position in academia, and I spend time on the phone with them, and I feel for them because it does take time to sort of build up your own conception of leadership and sort of find yourself in a complex organizational setting like universities are. I mean, I still have a lot to learn, especially because I'm brand new at Georgia Tech. I just arrived last September, but definitely at least I'm fortunate that I bring some years behind. And one of the most important things I probably have learned is that in a way the most important role that we have when we're running any kind of organization, big or small, private, academic or not, even though sometimes or maybe initially we think that we're supposed to have the right answers and that's why we have the job and that's what we get paid for. That's normally not the most important contribution that we are asked to make. And in fact, in situations with an enormous level of uncertainty like now, it is far more important to set up a sense of direction and a sense of grounding on the beliefs and values of an institution, build a sense of confidence, create a sense of really empowerment in people making decisions, and create a sense of shared mission and purpose, and a shared sense of where we're going and what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So in a way, we may be more sort of, if you will, preachers than military commanders in a way. Even though at times of urgency we do have to make decisions, and hopefully we'll make informed and wise decisions. But it's getting grounded on those values. I mean, for example, in the situation we're right now, which we're going through as a nation, through this very, very tiring and painful process of digesting the killing of George Floyd and the many other injustices before he has. And you said, well, what does that have to do with universities we were discussing earlier? A lot. I mean, it highlights our mission, our values, our commitments to equity and access, and I think setting up that and emphasizing and underlining that sense of direction, that's probably one of the most important things I feel like I can do right now.
Yeah. So Angel, we mentioned earlier you arrived at Georgia Tech from George Mason a little more than well, actually less than a year ago, I guess, right? So you're in your first year. I know that you've been really focused on your vision and strategy for Georgia Tech. So how does kind of the pandemic that we're living through, which is really kind of intensified a focus on higher ed, our students coming back this fall and on the whole idea of remote and online education, so many things have been brought up in higher ed because of this pandemic. How does that influence your idea of a strategic plan? Does it change it, for example? And more so, as you think about higher education nationally and internationally, there's all these projections now, and Scott Galloway from NYU is getting a lot of press right now for his talk about what's going to happen to higher ed. Do you think that this is going to be a big change for higher ed going forward? So let's focus first on Georgia Tech. What is it going to do for your own strategic plan, and then more broadly, because you really are a student of higher education, what impact do you think it will have on the sector as a whole?
In that sequence, so we did start after Bud Peterson, my predecessor. He had a successful run, a 10-year run under one strategic plan. So with my arrival, it was a natural point in time for us to engage in another cycle of strategic thinking and planning. And the first, we split it in two phases. One was, let's agree on the vision. Let's even rewrite our mission statement, a vision of the future we want to build, a set of values, a set of themes that we want to work on. And then the second phase is, now let's translate that into an actionable plan with metrics, with objectives. We're in the middle of that second phase. The first phase we just concluded. We concluded right as the COVID-19 pandemic got started, and we use a very inclusive approach for that first phase. We use a series of appreciative inquiry sessions. I challenged us to have hundreds of people participate in these in these sessions, and instead of hundreds, we ended up having actually thousands of people participate in these sessions. And so we crafted our vision and mission and values and that sort of sense of direction, and then COVID hit. And what it did, well, immediately what it did is it delayed our second phase, because we had to get organized and deal with the emergency of adapting to the situation. But what it also did is it offered a natural, painful but natural test of whether our vision was was going in the right direction. I mean, it forced us to ask, okay, given this new global, incredibly complex challenge, does our vision make sense in a way? And I think we passed that test well. Our mission and our new vision is one of inclusive innovation, and is one of impact, of innovation that brings all voices, all profiles to the table, and impact innovation that really contributes to improving the human condition, that makes a difference in the world we live in. And as COVID was hitting us, we saw incredible examples of our faculty and graduate students using their research to make a difference in the fight against the pandemic, and showing what real impact was about in real time, whether it was projecting and modeling the trends of the pandemic, whether it was designing respirators or personal protective devices, or participating in the development of assessments and testing and vaccines and antiviral treatments and the like. I mean, we saw impact in real time. So in a way, this has helped us even sharpen the focus and highlight some of the elements of that vision. Again, so there's been sort of in a way a good impact, even though I don't wish this upon anybody, to have a dramatic situation like this, to have that kind of testing of your planning process. Overall, I think that to the second part of your question, I have no doubt this is a defining moment for all aspects of our society, not just higher education, but very specifically higher education. I mean, for example, we've run this massive national experiment on telework, where 4 or 5 months ago, most people had never experienced telework, or they had sort of skeptical ideas about, does it work, does it not? Right now, all of us, or many of us, have experienced it, and now have a first-hand understanding of telework. And I'm sure that even as things improve on the public health front, that we may be thinking about the structure of work in different terms. Learning, the same thing. I mean, before the pandemic hit, less than half of faculty members across the country had experience really online, a remote type of teaching. Not all of our students really were comfortable or had that experience. Right now, everybody has. So even if we develop the antivirals and the vaccines and we go back to a pre-COVID sort of situation, I'm pretty sure we're going to be thinking about teaching in a very different way. Everybody, students have the experience, the faculty have the experience. We've seen what technology can do to improve the learning process. So I have absolutely no doubt. That might mean also that the people who before COVID may not have considered an online program. Let's say I want to get my master's. As you know, we have this incredibly successful masters of online masters in computer science, which has about 10,000 students right now. You would still have people who'd say, no, that's not for me. I don't believe in remote learning or distance learning and online learning. That is going to change. So I think patterns of demand of different types of programs, the application of learning technologies to the learning process, the structure of work. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the COVID experience is going to change us in many ways as a society, and is going to change as institutions of higher education as well.
President Cabrera, we did get a question that came in from LinkedIn that seems to perfectly dovetail with what you're talking about, which is what strategies for course delivery, in-person, synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid, are you thinking about for fall term? Obviously, I personally think this is asking for a lot of crystal ball work for university presidents, but in general, do you have any broad picture there, or is it's just as much?
Yes.
Kind of
No. I think it's a great question, and once again, it illustrates the kinds of things that are now possible and viable that a few months ago we would say, "Gosh, that's impossible." Let's say, for example, I mean, the discussion around flipping the classroom. I'm not a fan of the term, but I am a fan of the concept of using lecture halls for activities that really create value through interaction, right? Solving problems, working in groups, entering into a dialogue, and then using technology for things where technology is far superior, right? Watching a lecture that you can pause and rewind and things like many other things, right? That discussion now becomes very, very feasible. So in the fall, we're modeling different scenarios and sort of building up sort of archetypes of classes that our faculty can say, okay, that matches my needs and the needs of my class, and help faculty. So there's not going to be a one for all. This is the model we're going to use, but there will be different types, and it could well be that a faculty member, for example, tapes her lectures and make them available before the start of the week, and then uses class time, maybe even with smaller groups, to maintain appropriate physical distance, for learning strategies that make sense in the classroom, right? So that's an innovation that may make sense this fall to deal with COVID, but that's an innovation that I suspect will survive after COVID. Because it's going to have a lot of power. So yeah, all of those. I think hybrid learning is going to be my prediction is going to be a norm, not just at Georgia Tech, but across higher education. And I think those hybrid forms of learning are going to provide an incredible ground for further experimentation.
So, Anil, we mentioned earlier again that you made this transition last year. I can't even imagine what it would have been like if you were making the transition this year, right? But we have a number of presidents who are new, coming in a couple of weeks at some campuses as of July 1st. We have a number of other campuses where they have left, and now you have an interim president, in some cases an interim provost. What advice would you have? What advice might you give to those navigating either as a brand new president? So say, this was fast forwarded, or when we went back a year and this was happening last summer for you, or if you were an interim president, just kind of trying to figure out what to do for this fall and beyond. Any advice you have for those trying to deal with those issues?
Well, I mean, first, I honestly, I feel for them because I don't think this is an ideal way to start. It is what it is. I mean, but it is hard. I mean, and starting in a leadership position is always difficult, and this makes it even harder. And I know several of them personally. My former provost at George Mason is starting right now at Baruch College. Our former vice president of innovation is starting as chancellor at UC Denver. Of course, my successor at George Mason, Greg Washington, who's coming in from Irvine, and he's going to start also in the next few days. I mean, so I know many personal cases of folks whose beginnings are coinciding with this situation, and I have no doubt that they will really deal with the challenge in a good way. But it is hard because I mean one of the advantages that I had coming in September is that Georgia Tech was doing very well. There were lots of things that needed to be improved and questioned, but overall the school was doing very, very well. So I had the enormous luxury of being able to create this very inclusive process to really extract the collective dreams and aspirations of the community. So I guess if I can venture any useful advice would be that even though you may not have as much of a luxury as I did, and even though you will have to jump in a situation where you're going to have emergency task forces and emergency decisions, and you're going to have to turn on a dime in the next few weeks, that somehow you find the space to have that sort of deeper dive into the heart of the institution, that connectivity, that broad set of activities to really understand the spirit, the heart, the values, the sense, to define the sense of purpose of the university. That you don't just park all of that because emergency. That part is going to be essential. Is going to be defining for your presidency. Is going to be the most important thing that you're going to be able to do for your university.
That's super helpful. I have one of my institutions, UT Austin, has both an interim president and provost, and that is going and in the midst of pandemic, in the midst of everything going on. So I do think that this topic in particular, your expertise is very, very much appreciated. We'll wrap with one last question, which I am curious. You know, as a leader, it's important to share a compelling and hopeful vision to keep folks kind of moving in a direction together. I'm curious about what. Right now, how are you looking at the situation with hope and optimism? What is inspiring to you in this moment that's keeping you kind of propelling towards that compelling vision?
Well, thank you for asking that. So, presidents are people, believe it or not, and we also get hit by the uncertainty, and we have our ups and downs, and there's been plenty of that in the past three months, and even more recently this very week. And what really keeps me going and gives me a sense of optimism and confidence about the future is to look at really the endless examples of leadership, of ingenuity, of commitment by our students and by our faculty. I mean, even in the early days of the pandemic, to see our faculty member go back to their labs, to the maker spaces with students, designing products, trying to figure out, everybody asking themselves, how does my expertise matter in this moment? What is it that I can offer? One of my colleagues, by the way, who was featured in the New York Times, he's an expert in frugal technology and frugal innovation. The New York Times caught him at the hospital because his wife was in labor, and they were asking him, how do you manage to be doing all this innovation while you're doing this? You're having this situation at home, and says, one day my son will grow up and will ask me, what were you doing when COVID-19 hit? And he says, I want him to be proud. And boy, I think that kid is going to be very, very proud. And the rest of us, I mean, every time we have seen so many examples when we had to go online and remote, the fact that everybody did what they had to do, the students did what they had to do, the faculty did what they had to do. I mean, these situations, I know they created a lot of angst and pain and ambiguity and uncertainty, but they also bring out the best in people. And there's been so much of that to go around, and so many constant reminders of why the mission of our institutions of higher education matters so much, that I think we've had plenty of ammunition to keep us all going and going strong.
I completely agree. I feel like right now, the resilience of our students is on full display, the kindness and empathy of our faculty, staff, and administrators, and just their selflessness of helping each other navigate. And then I also, from these interviews, my observation is that I've worked with university presidents for the past 20 years. I don't think they've ever been better. I think they're more focused and passionate and clear right now because of the challenge in front of them. I'm seeing a level of clarity and vision communicated that I think people really appreciate. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. And for you at home, thank you for the fantastic comments that we saw that were in either LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube or Periscope. So very excited to wrap up today, but thank you again, President Cabrera. And I want to share for folks at home, next week we'll be broadcasting on the University Innovation Alliance channel on LinkedIn, and I will have a different co-host so that Jeff can take a break. I will have Paul Fain from Inside Higher Ed as my co-host, but we look forward to sharing with you an exciting new president on Wednesday that we will be announcing. So thank you again, President Cabrera, and Jeff, hope you enjoy your nice week off.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you, Jeff. Much
Thank you.
appreciated. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.